They say your children are your greatest comfort in your old age, but when my husband died, mine became my greatest fear. I never imagined that the two people I raised with my own hands would one day try to throw me out of the very home their father built. But what they didn't know was, I had a truth that would change everything for them. Before we begin, please make sure to like and subscribe. It truly helps me share more stories like this. After my husband Rahim passed away, the world around me became strangely hollow, as if someone had drained the color from the walls and pulled the warmth from the air. The first morning after his funeral, I woke up automatically at the time I used to make breakfast for both of us. For 40 years, my days began with the sound of his voice and the gentle drag of his slippers along the floor. But now, when I opened my eyes, the silence felt too loud, almost mocking, reminding me that I would never hear him again. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at his empty pillow, my hands trembling slightly as they brushed against the cotton sheet where his head once rested. Every little detail of him lived in this house, the faint scent of his hair oil on the cushion, his reading glasses still placed carefully beside the lamp, and the sweater he always wore still hanging on the hook he insisted we keep near the bedroom door. But for the first time in my life, none of it brought comfort. Instead, it felt like each memory was pressing heavily on my chest, making it hard to breathe. My children, Sarah and Noman, did not stay the night after the funeral ended. They said they were tired, emotionally drained, and needed rest. I didn't argue. I simply nodded and watched them walk out the door, closing it behind them while I stood alone in the echoing quiet of the house. I made tea for myself, though I barely tasted it. I sat near the window where Rahim and I often talked for hours about nothing in particular. The weather, the garden, the neighbors, our children. The empty chair beside me felt like a wound. I remember whispering, "I'm alone now," and the words floated in the air like dust, settling silently around me. Over the next few days, the people who came to offer condolences slowly stopped coming. Life for them returned to normal. People went back to work, children went back to school, but for me, time had stopped moving entirely. I tried distracting myself with house chores, but every corner I cleaned reminded me of him. Every dish I washed reminded me of the meals we shared. The loneliness was deep, but even deeper was the hope that my children would fill the emptiness with their presence, their warmth, their care. After all, parents spend their entire lives caring for their children, believing one day the love will return to them in the same way. But instead of comfort, I began seeing something else entirely. The first sign came much earlier than I expected. Sarah visited one evening, but she didn't sit with me for long. She kept checking her phone, her fingers tapping anxiously on the screen as she spoke to someone through messages. When I tried talking to her about her father, something simple, something soft, she didn't respond with emotion. Instead, she said, "Emmy, I know you're sad, but you should start thinking practically. Things change after someone dies." The words were sharp in a way I didn't recognize, and then she said something that made my stomach twist. "We also need to discuss responsibilities now that father isn't here." Responsibilities, not comfort, not time together, not healing, but responsibilities.
I didn't know what she meant then, but soon I understood. A few days later, Noman came over. Unlike Sarah, he didn't bother trying to act gentle. He walked straight into the house as if inspecting it, his eyes shifting from the living room to the dining table to the staircase. He had always been impatient, always in a hurry, but this time it felt different. It felt as though he was assessing something, not visiting his mother. He didn't even ask how I was coping. He simply said, "Ami, we need to talk soon. There are things to settle." Things to settle? I didn't understand. And perhaps I didn't want to understand. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Grief can distort perception, I told myself. Maybe they were also hurting and didn't know how to express it. Maybe they were stressed with their own families, their own work, their own burdens. But everything collapsed the day I walked into the living room and saw them both standing near Rahim's drawer, the drawer he always kept locked, the one he told me to open only when necessary. When they saw me, they jumped, embarrassed, their faces flushed with guilt. Sara laughed nervously and said, "Oh, we were just sorting Baba's things." But I saw Noman quickly hiding something behind his back. They left soon after, without sitting with me for even 10 minutes. When the door closed behind them, I stood staring at the drawer. My heart told me something was very wrong. The next day, the truth finally showed itself in full. I was sitting in the kitchen peeling vegetables for dinner when I overheard Sara speaking loudly on the phone. "Yes, we'll finalize it soon. The house papers will be ready. Don't worry." I froze, the peeler slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. House papers? Finalize what? I walked to the living room quietly, my steps slow and cautious. Sara did notice me standing behind the door frame. She continued speaking, unaware that her words were slicing through me like a blade. "It's better to sell it now. The market is good, and once it's sold, we can figure out which old age home is best for Mom." My breath caught in my chest, my knees weakened. They were planning to send me away, to sell my home, the home they grew up in, the home their father built brick by brick. I stepped back, not wanting her to see me. I waited until she left the room before walking silently back to the kitchen. I could feel my pulse hammering inside my chest, my vision blurred with tears. I couldn't believe the children I raised, the children I fed with my own hands, the children whose diapers I changed and whose tears I wiped, were now planning to push me out of the home I kept alive for decades. That night, after hours of crying, I felt something shift inside me, a kind of strength I didn't know I still had. Rahim always told me I was stronger than I believed. Maybe this was the moment I needed to be strong.
I walked into the bedroom quietly and approached the drawer that Sara and Noman had been searching for. I pulled out the small key that Rahim used to keep in the flower vase hidden behind the artificial lilies. With trembling fingers, I unlocked the drawer. Inside, everything was neat and untouched. His notebooks, his old photographs, a few envelopes, and at the very bottom, a long brown envelope sealed tightly. My breath hitched. I opened it slowly, and there it was, Rahim's official will. My hands shook uncontrollably as I read the words. He had written in his careful, steady handwriting, "All properties, assets, and finances belong to my wife. No one else will have a claim until after her death." And then, in smaller writing, "Take care of yourself, my love. Our children may not always understand your worth, but you must always remember it." I pressed the paper to my chest and cried like a child. He knew. He knew life. He knew people. He knew that even those you love can change when money is involved. The next morning, when Noman and Sara arrived, together as if planned, their faces looked strangely determined. Noman had that confident look he always wore when he was about to take control of something. Sara had a soft smile, but her eyes looked calculating. "Ami," Noman said, placing some papers on the table. "It's just some property adjustments." I didn't sit down. I didn't hesitate. I didn't tremble. I simply looked them both in the eye and said, "No." Their expressions fell instantly. Noman frowned. "What do you mean, no? You don't even know what these papers are." "I know exactly what they are, and I know exactly what you're trying to do." Sara opened her mouth to protest, but I placed the will on the table in front of them. Their eyes widened. They looked at each other, then back at the document. "You searched for this," I said softly.
didn't you?" Neither answered. My voice didn't shake anymore. It was steady, calm, firm, stronger than it had been in months. "This house belongs to me. Everything your father built, he left it for me, and I am not signing anything. Not today, not ever." For the first time since Rahim died, my children looked small, ashamed, guilty, as if the darkness inside them was finally exposed to the light. When I placed Rahim's will on the table, the room changed, the air tightened, the walls felt closer, and for a moment, nobody breathed. Sarah's face went pale, as if someone had drained the blood from beneath her skin. Noman stiffened, his jaw tightening, his eyes darting between me and the document, like a cornered animal trying to decide whether to run or fight. I had never seen my children look like that, exposed, stripped of excuses, unable to hide behind the masks they had worn since their father died. But in that moment, I also felt something different, something I had not felt in months. I finally felt like Rahim was standing beside me, holding my hand. Noman was the first to speak, though he stumbled over the words. "Ami, you misunderstood. We were just trying to help. We didn't want to bother you with these things. It's too much for you alone." His voice trembled slightly, a crack in the authority he usually carried. It almost made me want to believe him, but the memories of their whispered plans, the conversation about old age homes, and the eagerness with which they searched the drawer, all of that was still fresh in my mind. Sarah reached forward, gently touching the edge of the will with the tips of her fingers. "This doesn't mean anything," she whispered, though she clearly knew it meant everything. "It's old. Baba probably didn't mean—" I cut her off, my voice steady and calm, though inside my heart was racing. "He meant every word. Your father never did anything without intention, and you know that." Sarah opened her mouth again, but no words came out. Her eyes glistened slightly, but I couldn't tell if it was guilt or frustration that the plan had fallen apart. I walked quietly to the sofa and sat down, my hands folded neatly in my lap. "Sit," I said gently, not raising my voice. It was strange, how power shifts, how the mother they thought was fragile suddenly felt unbreakable. They hesitated, but eventually they sat opposite me, their backs too straight, their eyes restless. "When your father was alive, he protected all of us. He protected this home, this family, and the values we lived by. But after he died, everything changed. Not because life forced us to change, but because you chose to change." Noman looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I continued. "Do you know what hurt me the most? It wasn't your plans to sell the house. It wasn't the papers you wanted me to sign. It wasn't even the thought of being sent to an old age home." I swallowed hard, my chest tightening as the words left me. What hurt the most was realizing that your father's love didn't become your love.
I didn't know what she meant then, but soon I understood. A few days later, Noman came over. Unlike Sarah, he didn't bother trying to act gentle. He walked straight into the house as if inspecting it, his eyes shifting from the living room to the dining table to the staircase. He had always been impatient, always in a hurry, but this time it felt different. It felt as though he was assessing something, not visiting his mother. He didn't even ask how I was coping. He simply said, "Ami, we need to talk soon. There are things to settle." Things to settle? I didn't understand. And perhaps I didn't want to understand. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Grief can distort perception, I told myself. Maybe they were also hurting and didn't know how to express it. Maybe they were stressed with their own families, their own work, their own burdens. But everything collapsed the day I walked into the living room and saw them both standing near Rahim's drawer, the drawer he always kept locked, the one he told me to open only when necessary. When they saw me, they jumped, embarrassed, their faces flushed with guilt. Sarah laughed nervously and said, "Oh, we were just sorting Baba's things." But I saw Noman quickly hiding something behind his back. They left soon after, without sitting with me for even 10 minutes. When the door closed behind them, I stood staring at the drawer. My heart told me something was very wrong. The next day, the truth finally showed itself in full. I was sitting in the kitchen peeling vegetables for dinner when I overheard Sarah speaking loudly on the phone. "Yes, we'll finalize it soon. The house papers will be ready. Don't worry." I froze, the peeler slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. House papers? Finalize what? I walked to the living room quietly, my steps slow and cautious. Sarah did notice me standing behind the door frame. She continued speaking, unaware that her words were slicing through me like a blade. "It's better to sell it now. The market is good, and once it's sold, we can figure out which old age home is best for Mom." My breath caught in my chest, my knees weakened. They were planning to send me away, to sell my home, the home they grew up in, the home their father built brick by brick. I stepped back, not wanting her to see me. I waited until she left the room before walking silently back to the kitchen. I could feel my pulse hammering inside my chest, my vision blurred with tears. I couldn't believe the children I raised, the children I fed with my own hands, the children whose diapers I changed and whose tears I wiped, were now planning to push me out of the home I kept alive for decades. That night, after hours of crying, I felt something shift inside me, a kind of strength I didn't know I still had. Rahim always told me I was stronger than I believed. Maybe this was the moment I needed to be strong.
Their eyes softened, and I continued, "I built this home with your father. Every tile, every wall, every corner holds a piece of my life. Your childhood is inside these walls. Your memories are still alive here, and I am still alive here." Noman's expression cracked slightly, though he tried to hide it. Sarah nodded slowly, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. I leaned back, my fingers gently tapping the folded will on the table. "This house stays with me until I die. That's what your father wished, and I will honor his wish." I paused, letting the words settle. "But what happens after that depends on how you treat me while I am alive." Noman blinked, startled. Sarah's eyes widened. I continued, my tone gentle but firm. "A mother's heart is a strange thing. It doesn't hold grudges easily, but it also doesn't forget how she was treated. If you want this home, if you want your father's legacy, if you want his blessings, then earn them. Not through papers, not through tricks, not—" Their eyes softened, and I continued, "I built this home with your father. Every tile, every wall, every corner holds a piece of my life. Your childhood is inside these walls. Your memories are still alive here, and I am still alive here." Noman's expression cracked slightly, though he tried to hide it. Sarah nodded slowly, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. I leaned back, my fingers gently tapping the folded will on the table. "This house stays with me until I die. That's what your father wished, and I will honor his wish." I paused, letting the words settle. "But what happens after that depends on how you treat me while I am alive." Noman blinked, startled. Sarah's eyes widened. I continued, my tone gentle but firm. "A mother's heart is a strange thing. It doesn't hold grudges easily, but it also doesn't forget how she was treated. If you want this home, if you want your father's legacy, if you want his blessings, then earn them. Not through papers, not through tricks, not through signatures, but through love, through respect, through presence." Tears spilled down Sarah's face again, and she covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders shaking. Noman looked down, staring at the floor, his eyes glistening, though he refused to let the tears fall. I sighed. Your father used to say, people show their true selves when they think no one is watching. You showed your true selves these past weeks, but you can choose to change that. The question is, do you want to? Sarah stood suddenly, walked to me, and knelt beside my chair, her hands wrapped around mine, warm and trembling. I'm sorry, Ami. I'm so sorry. Her voice cracked, and she finally let the tears fall freely. I was wrong. We were wrong. Noman remained seated for a moment, staring at his hands. Then slowly, hesitantly, he stood, walked toward me, and placed a hand on my shoulder. I'm sorry, Ami. I don't know why we acted like that. I think grief made us blind. I placed my hand over his. Blindness can be forgiven, but cruelty cannot. Decide which one was yours. He swallowed hard. Blindness, he whispered. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small warmth flicker inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but relief. Relief that my children still had a chance to return to the kindness they once had. After a few moments, I spoke again. From today, things will change. Not for me, for you. I will live my life with dignity. I will not be controlled, manipulated, or pushed aside. I will not sign anything without understanding. I will ask questions. I will stand up for myself.
They both nodded silently. And you, I added, will visit me because you want to, not because you need something. Sarah let out a shaky breath. We will, Ami. Noman cleared his throat. We promise. I gently squeezed their hands. Good. Then let's begin again. Not as enemies, but as family. For the first time in weeks, I felt Rahim's presence around me, as if he was smiling softly, proud that I had finally stood up for myself. The house felt warmer, lighter, alive again. Without knowing it, my children had given me something I didn't expect after my husband's death, the rediscovery of my own strength. And as I stood in that hallway, my heart beating like a tired drum against my ribs, I realized something painful. Grief hadn't broken me. People had. The very children I carried, nursed, protected, and raised had slowly turned me into a stranger in my own home, a woman tiptoeing through her days as if she were an intruder. But I wasn't ready to give up, not on them, not on myself. So I walked deeper into the house, feeling every memory tug at me. My husband's laugh echoing from the old armchair, the smell of his morning tea lingering like a ghost, the photo frames lining the wall like silent witnesses to everything we once were. I reached out and touched his favorite picture, him holding our youngest child on his shoulders, both smiling as if the world couldn't touch them. And that's when it hit me. He would never have allowed this. He would never have let his wife feel invisible, never have let his children feel so entitled that they could forget love, loyalty, and basic humanity. A slow, calm strength rose in my chest. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand and walked toward the kitchen where I could hear hushed voices, my children whispering, thinking I couldn't hear. She'll have to agree, my eldest daughter said sharply. We can't afford to wait. The house needs to be sold before the end of the month. My heart clenched. The house? The house my husband built with his bare hands. The house that held every birthday, every fight, every apology, every kiss goodnight. Mom's not getting any younger, my son added, and the casual cruelty in his tone felt like a knife twisting. She doesn't need something that big anyway. We'll put her in the apartment near the main road, close to the clinic and shops. They spoke about me like I was a burden, a responsibility they wanted to offload. They didn't mention memories, attachment, emotions, or respect. Only money, convenience, and calculations. For a moment, I felt my legs weaken, as if grief and betrayal were pulling me to the ground. But I inhaled deeply, straightened my shoulders, and stepped into the kitchen. Their voices fell silent instantly.
3 pairs of eyes snapped toward me, each with a different expression: annoyance, guilt, fear. "So," I said softly, "you've decided my future without asking me?" They exchanged glances, and my eldest forced a smile. "Mom, we're doing what's best for you." "Best for me?" I repeated in my mind, feeling those words burn. My husband used to say that anything done for someone without asking them was never for them at all. It was for the doer's comfort. "You think selling our home, his home, is what's best?" I asked. My son stepped forward. "Mom, we need the money. Things are hard." And that was when truth struck me again. They weren't helping me, they were helping themselves. I looked at them one by one, and for the first time, I truly saw them, not as my children, but as adults shaped by their own greed, their own insecurities, their own lack of gratitude. And yet, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt clarity. "Sit down," I said. They obeyed, perhaps sensing something new in my voice, something unshakable. "You all seem to have forgotten something," I began slowly. "Your father didn't leave me helpless. He didn't leave me dependent. He left me prepared." Confusion flickered across their faces. My eldest frowned. "What do you mean?" I reached for the small wooden box at the corner of the table. Their eyes followed my hand, curious, impatient. I opened it. Inside was a single envelope, thick, sealed, and heavy with the weight of truth. My husband's handwriting decorated the front. "For my wife only. Open when you feel alone." My children leaned forward, but I pulled the envelope closer to my chest, not yet ready to let them see. "Your father trusted me," I whispered, "and he left things behind that none of you know about." Their expressions shifted: shock, worry,
Impatience. But I continued, stronger now. "You think this house is the only thing we have? You think selling it will solve everything? You think pushing me into a small apartment will make your lives easier?" I shook my head slowly. "You have no idea what lies beneath the choices your father made." I slid the envelope open. Their eyes widened. Inside were documents, bank papers, property records, and a handwritten letter. My husband had been preparing for years. He had built investments none of us knew about, bought properties under my name, and secured enough money to ensure I would never depend on anyone, not even my children. And at the bottom of the letter was the part that changed everything. "If they ever betray you, my love, remember, everything I built is yours alone." My children froze, their confidence collapsing. My voice didn't rise. I didn't shout. I didn't lecture. I simply said what my husband would have wanted me to say. "This home is not for sale, and my future will not be decided by those who see me as a burden." They stared at me, shocked, speechless, and suddenly aware of something they had forgotten. Their mother was not weak. She was a survivor. I folded the letter, placed it back in the box, and stood. "If you want to stay in my life," I said quietly, "it will be with respect. If not, the door is open." The room stayed silent, heavy with the weight of consequences, and for the first time since my husband's death, I felt powerful again. My children sat there frozen, the weight of their own intentions pressing on them heavier than any words I could ever speak, and for a long moment no one moved, no one breathed, as if the truth my husband left behind had sucked all the air out of the room. Then my eldest daughter finally swallowed hard, her voice cracking as she tried to gather whatever dignity she still thought she had. "Mom, we didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered, but the quiver in her voice proved otherwise. And I simply looked at her, not with anger, but with the quiet disappointment only a mother can feel, the kind that pierces deeper than any shout, deeper than any slap, because it reflects a broken expectation. My son leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead, unable to look at me, clearly embarrassed, clearly caught, clearly rethinking every plan he had made behind my back. And my youngest, sweet on the outside, but somehow the sharpest beneath the surface, kept her eyes on the wooden box,
almost calculating, as if she was already trying to understand what this meant for her future rather than what it meant for my heart. And that realization alone stung more painfully than anything else. For years, I had told myself they were simply stressed, busy, overwhelmed with their own lives. But now, faced with their silence, I understood that somewhere along the way, love had become convenience, and their mother had become an asset to manage rather than a person to cherish. But I also realized something else. My husband, wise even in death, had known this might happen, had seen truths I refused to see, and he had protected me even when I didn't know I needed protecting. I turned away from them and closed the wooden box firmly, the click of its lock echoing through the kitchen like a final verdict, and then I walked toward the window, letting the warm sunlight spill across my face, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of direction, a sense of purpose, a sense that I didn't need to cling to anyone who didn't value me. Behind me, the tension thickened as my children whispered among themselves, thinking I couldn't hear. But a mother always hears. "What do we do now?" my son muttered under his breath. "She has everything. We can't force her." And the panic in his tone only confirmed what I already suspected. They hadn't been planning for my well-being, but for their own shortcuts. I turned back to them with a calmness
that surprised even me, a steadiness that came from loss, love, betrayal, and the quiet rediscovery of my own strength. And I said, "You don't have to do anything. I will handle my life from here." But they didn't like that answer. Oh no, they didn't like it one bit, because independence meant they couldn't benefit from my vulnerability anymore. My eldest stood up abruptly, forcing a smile that was so painfully fake, I almost felt sorry for her. "Mom, let's not be dramatic," she said, as if I were the one who had plotted behind her parents' back, as if I were the one discussing her future in secret meetings. And I stared at her long enough to see the guilt flicker again under her mask. "This isn't drama," I replied quietly. "This is clarity." And the words seemed to slice right through the tension, because she sank back into her chair as though her strength had finally given out. I moved toward the stove, my hands trembling only slightly as I prepared tea for myself, because I no longer felt obligated to serve them at that moment, not out of anger, but out of a sudden and profound understanding that I needed to reclaim the respect they had slowly chipped away from me, piece by piece, year by year, without me noticing. They watched me in uncomfortable silence, perhaps expecting me to break down, to weep, to show desperation. But instead, I lifted my cup to my lips and sipped slowly, letting the quiet stretch like a boundary I had never set before. And in that silence, they realized something powerful. Their mother was not weak, not fragile, not easily swayed or manipulated. She was calm, steady, unshaken, and that terrified them. Finally, my son murmured, "Mom, we're sorry." But it wasn't the kind of sorry born from realization or remorse. It was the kind born from fear of losing something, fear of losing access, fear of losing benefits, and I knew the difference instantly. I looked at him with eyes my husband used to call truthful eyes incapable of pretending, and I said, "If you are sorry, then let your actions show it." And the simplicity of the sentence seemed to hit them harder than a shout would have, because their expressions shifted from guilt to confusion to a strange, quiet shame. I set my cup down gently, walked past them, and left the kitchen without another word, each step echoing with a newfound confidence I never knew I still had. And as I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I whispered to myself, "I am not alone. Not anymore," because my husband's voice, his wisdom, his love, felt alive inside me again, guiding me, strengthening me, reminding me that even in widowhood, I was never meant to shrink, never meant to surrender, never meant to be less than whole. And deep down, I felt something else simmering, something the children had no idea existed yet, something I wasn't ready to reveal. My husband hadn't only left money, he had left plans, instructions, and one final secret that would change everything.
I entered my bedroom and closed the door softly behind me, not to shut my children out, but to shut myself into a space where clarity could grow without interference, where grief and strength could sit side by side without judgment. And as I leaned against the wooden door, feeling its familiar grain beneath my palm, I allowed myself a long breath, the kind that empties out years of unspoken disappointments. The house was quiet now, the kind of quiet that follows a truth too heavy to ignore, and I walked slowly toward the small dresser where my husband's old belongings still rested untouched, each item carrying a whisper of him, each memory sitting patiently like a book waiting to be reopened. I reached for the envelope he had left me, the second one, the one I hadn't shown them, its edges worn from the number of times I had held it without the courage to open it fully, because something in me knew it contained not just instructions, but revelations, and perhaps a painful mirror of the things he'd seen in our children long before I was ready to admit them. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the late afternoon sunlight spill across the floor like a golden path, and finally opened the envelope, feeling my breath catch as I unfolded the papers inside. His handwriting, steady and unmistakably his, stretched across the page, and even before reading a single sentence,
Tears welled up, not from sorrow, but from that deep ache of missing someone who had known you better than you knew yourself. "My love," he wrote, "if you are reading this, then I trust you have already discovered the truth about their intentions, and I want you to know this. You do not owe them your silence, your sacrifice, or your surrender. You owe them your honesty, and you owe yourself freedom." And the words struck me like a beam of light cutting through darkness, because he had seen exactly what I was finally seeing. Children who had once loved us dearly, but had grown into adults shaped by greed, convenience, and entitlement. I read on, my hands trembling slightly, as he explained how he had arranged everything, every account, every property, every document, not to punish our children, but to protect me, because he feared that once he was gone, they might forget the difference between inheritance and affection, between responsibility and opportunity. But then came the part that made my heart beat faster, the part he had hinted at but never spoken aloud. "There is one thing they know nothing about," he wrote, "one thing meant only for you. Follow the key I left in your locket, and it will lead you to the truth of what I built in silence, away from the noise of expectations." And suddenly the old key, the one I had assumed belonged to an old chest or drawer, felt heavier, more meaningful, as if it carried a legacy far greater than any of them imagined. I pressed the key into my palm, feeling its cool metal against my skin, and for the first time since my husband's passing, I felt a spark of something bright, anticipation, possibility, a quiet thrill, because I knew this was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a revelation that would shake the ground my children stood on. Downstairs, I could hear them whispering still, their voices tense and unsure, and I realized they believed they still had control, still had time to persuade me, manipulate me, steer me. They had no idea how much the world was about to shift under their feet. I folded the letter carefully, kissed its edge gently, and placed it close to my chest, then stood up with a calmness that felt almost regal, a strength that did not come from anger, but from certainty. And I walked toward the window, staring out at the garden my husband had planted years ago, remembering how he always told me, "Truth grows, even if you try to hide it," and now I understood exactly what he meant. I turned toward the mirror, seeing my reflection clearly, widow, mother, woman, survivor, and I whispered to myself, "It's time," not in bitterness, but in quiet determination, because I realized that this next chapter wasn't about teaching my children a lesson. It was about reclaiming the life they had tried to manage for me and revealing the secret my husband had entrusted me with, one that would change the balance of everything they thought they controlled.
I left the room quietly, not with the heaviness of someone defeated, but with the calm poise of a woman who finally understood her place in her own life. And as I moved down the hallway, I could hear my children's voices grow softer as they noticed my footsteps approaching, the kind of silence that slips in when guilt sits at the table uninvited. They turned to look at me, eyes wide, waiting for my anger, my tears, my surrender. But I gave them none of those things, only a small, gentle smile that confused them, the kind of smile that comes from knowing something they don't yet grasp. And I walked past them to the kitchen sink, rinsed my hands slowly under warm water, letting the moments stretch until their impatience cracked first. "Mom, we didn't mean to upset you," my oldest finally said, his voice carrying the tone of someone who regrets not the action but the reaction. And I nodded softly without turning around, drying my hands carefully on the
Faded towel my husband used to tease me about keeping for too many years. "I know," I said simply, not accusing, not comforting, just stating a truth that settled heavily in the space between us. And they watched me with the uneasy realization that I wasn't reacting the way they expected, because they were used to a mother who bent, not one who stood. I walked to the table and sat down slowly, neatly folding my hands, the key still hidden in my palm, its edges pressing a quiet strength into my skin. And they exchanged glances, unsure of what this silence meant, sensing a shift they couldn't define. My daughter spoke next, her voice a blend of irritation and forced gentleness. "Mom, we're just trying to help you. You can't manage everything on your own anymore." And the irony of her words sat in my chest like a small ember, because they were not trying to help. They were trying to manage, to control, to shape my future into something convenient for them. I lifted my eyes to hers and held her gaze for a long moment, not with challenge, but with a depth she wasn't prepared to meet. And I said softly, "I know what you think I can't manage," letting the words settle like warm dust on an old shelf. "But you don't know what I've already managed alone." And I saw confusion flicker across her face, a faint spark of unease, as if she sensed for the first time that they might not understand me as well as they believed. My youngest shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair, and asked, "What does that mean, Mom?" But I didn't answer, not yet, because this moment was not for explanations, it was for awakening. Instead, I looked down at the table, tracing the grain of the wood with my finger, remembering the nights my husband and I sat here making plans our children never knew about, plans rooted in love and foresight, not greed. "We'll talk tomorrow," I finally said, rising from my seat with the same calmness I had carried from my room. And their protests began almost immediately, questions, confusion, frustration, but I simply lifted my hand gently, not to silence them, but to let them know the conversation was no longer theirs to direct. I walked past them again, the soft thud of my footsteps echoing lightly in the quiet house, and as I reached the base of the stairs, I paused, letting their whispers blur into the background like fading music. The key in my hand felt warmer now, as if it had a heartbeat of its own, guiding me forward, reminding me that tomorrow was not just another day, it was the beginning of a truth they could not stop. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling lighter with every step, not because I was leaving them behind, but because I was stepping closer to the part of my life that was still mine, untouched and waiting, the part my husband had protected with such love and trust that even death could not erase it. I walked into my bedroom again, closing the door with a soft click that carried more meaning than any raised voice ever could, and I stood there in the quiet, letting the weight of the entire day settle around me like a slow, warm tide, not heavy enough to drown me, but strong enough to remind me that change had arrived. I moved toward the window and parted the curtains slightly, letting the moonlight spill across the floor in a thin silver line, and I watched it stretch toward me like a gentle invitation to breathe, to think, to remember who I had been before grief and loneliness made me small. The house felt different tonight, not because anything had changed physically, but because I had finally stopped trying to be the mother they expected, the silent one, the agreeable one, the one whose needs came last, and in that shift, the walls themselves seemed to exhale with me. I sat down at the edge of the bed and opened my hand, looking at the small old key resting in my palm, its metal reflecting the moonlight in soft glimmers, and I thought of my husband, how carefully he had planned things, how he always made sure I had something of my own, how he believed in my strength even when I doubted it myself. He used to say, "You're stronger than you think," with that little half-smile that made everything feel possible, and tonight, for the first time since he passed, I felt the truth of those words wrap around me like a quiet embrace. I closed my fingers around the key again and pressed it to my chest, feeling an unexpected warmth bloom beneath my ribs. Not sadness exactly, but something gentler, a blend of memory, love, and arriving courage I hadn't felt in years. Downstairs, I could still hear my children speaking in low voices, their confusion mixing with irritation, their plans unraveling now that I wasn't complying.
I wasn't reacting like the helpless widow they imagined me to be, and I couldn't blame them entirely because they had grown up watching me give everything without ever asking for anything in return. Maybe they mistook my patience for weakness, my silence for dependence, my grief for fragility. And maybe, just maybe, this was the moment they needed to realize that I was more than the mother who cooked their meals and folded their clothes and loved them unconditionally even when they didn't deserve it. I lay back on the bed slowly, staring at the ceiling where faint shadows moved like soft whispers of the past, and I let myself drift into thoughts I had been avoiding for months, what I wanted, what I needed, what I was still capable of, and how much life there still was in the parts of me I had buried after my husband died. As the minutes passed, I felt something unlock in my chest, something like a door opening after years of being closed, and behind it was not fear, but clarity, an understanding that tomorrow's conversation would not break me because I was no longer standing in the place they expected to find me. I turned to my side and pulled the blanket up to my shoulders, holding the key close to my heart as if it were a small anchor tying me to a future they knew nothing about. And as my eyes grew heavy, I whispered softly, as though speaking to my husband in the quiet darkness, "I'm ready now." And for the first time in a very long time, I slept not with worry in my chest, but with calm determination resting gently in its place. I kept walking deeper into the house, the memories clinging to me like dust, every step reminding me of everything I had lost and everything I had endured. And as I reached the doorway to the old storage room that had once been my husband's little workspace, I felt my heartbeat tighten, because I knew even after all these years, his scent would still linger somewhere beneath the layers of forgotten boxes and rusted metal pieces he used to collect. And the quiet pain of remembering him was both a comfort and a wound that refused to close. The room was dim, but I could still picture him sitting on that wooden stool, working late into the night while I sat beside him, pretending to read while secretly watching him, because the way he focused made me fall in love with him every single day. And the ache of knowing my family had thrown me out shortly after losing him made the betrayal sharper than broken glass. As I moved inside, I felt my fingers tracing the edge of the table he used to work on, and the dust danced into the air at my touch, floating like ghosts of the past. And suddenly, all the strength I had built over the years felt small compared to the avalanche of memories rushing over me. I stood still, letting the silence press around me, and then, just as I was about to leave the room, I heard my niece's voice calling from the hallway again, softer this time, almost fearful, as if she could feel the heaviness inside the room. When she stepped inside, her eyes widened as though she was seeing the history etched into the walls, and she whispered, "Auntie, I didn't know this place still looked like this.
but I could only smile faintly because there were things no one could erase, no matter how hard life tried. She moved closer to me, her voice trembling a little as she asked, "Do you miss him?" And the question hit me so deeply that for a moment I couldn't speak, and when I finally did, my voice cracked as I said, "Every day. But missing him gave me strength too, because I survived everything they put me through, and I'm still standing." My niece lowered her head, the weight of guilt shading her expression, and whispered again, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Auntie, for everything we did, for everything we didn't know, for everything they hid from us." And I placed a hand on her shoulder, gently lifting her chin because I could see she was carrying a burden she didn't deserve. "You were a child," I said softly. "You didn't choose what happened. Your elders did." But even as I spoke, I knew
That moment was only the beginning of the truth that needed to come out, a truth her mother, my sister-in-law, had desperately hoped would stay buried forever. As we walked out of the room, closing the door behind us with a sigh that felt like closing a chapter of pain, I asked her quietly, "Why did you call me today? After all these years, why now?" And the hesitation in her eyes told me that whatever came next would not be simple. She took a breath, holding her hands together as if steadying herself, and finally whispered, "Auntie, something happened, and we need you." The words struck me with a mix of confusion and wariness, because the very family that once kicked me out without a second thought was now saying they needed me, and every instinct in my body told me this wasn't just about guilt or reconciliation. It was something deeper, something they could no longer hide or control. Before I could ask anything else, she turned toward the living room, motioning for me to follow, and the moment I stepped inside, I saw my sister-in-law sitting on the couch, her posture tense, her hands shaking slightly as she stared at the floor instead of at me, as if unable to face the ghost of the woman she wronged. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until she finally lifted her head, her eyes red, her face worn with the kind of stress that only comes from years of hiding something heavy, and she said my name in a voice that barely held together. I didn't respond, not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted her to feel the weight of the moment, the weight of the past she had built her comfort upon, while leaving me to fend for myself. She swallowed hard and said, "There is something you should know, something about your husband, something I should have told you years ago." And those words hit me harder than any insult, any betrayal, any abandonment, because they cracked open a door I thought was sealed forever, a door leading to answers I never asked for, but always feared existed. My heart pounded, my fingers trembled, and every memory of my husband, every smile, every touch, every fight, every moment flooded through me with terrifying clarity as I whispered, "What about him?" Her lips quivered, guilt carving deep into her expression, and she finally said, "Your husband, he left something behind, something for you, something I hid." For a moment, the world froze. My breath caught in my chest, my mind screamed, and everything inside me began to unravel. The room felt smaller the moment those words left her mouth, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen, and I stood frozen, feeling the weight of years I thought I had already grieved suddenly shifting under my feet, and with a trembling voice I demanded, "What did you hide from me?" But she only closed her eyes as though bracing for a storm she knew she had caused long ago. My niece moved beside me, holding her breath, waiting, afraid of what would be revealed, and for a moment my sister-in-law looked older than she ever had, worn by secrets and consequences, before she finally opened her trembling hands, revealing a small metal key I recognized instantly because it belonged to a locker my husband used to rent, a locker I was told was emptied and closed years ago after his death.
My heart dropped as I stared at it, disbelief mixing with grief, because that locker was the one thing he always guarded closely, telling me it held something for the future, something important, something he would show me someday. But that someday never came, because life had ripped him away before he could. My lips shook as I whispered, "Why? Why would you hide this from me?" And the rawness in her
Voice filled the room like a crack in the air. She broke down, her tears streaming uncontrollably as she sank to her knees, her guilt too heavy to stand beneath, and she said, "Because I was jealous. Because after he died, everything felt like it was slipping away from me. Our home, our finances, our stability, and I thought whatever he left would be money, something valuable, something that should stay in the family, not go to you. I thought you would remarry, move on, forget us. I thought you didn't deserve it." The cruelty of her confession sliced through me like a blade dipped in old wounds, and yet hearing her broken sobs also revealed a woman who had been living in the shadows of her own decisions, punished by them every single day. My niece cried softly, covering her mouth, horrified by what her mother had done, and I felt the world around me tilt as I took the key from her trembling hand, the cold metal burning my skin with the truth of everything I never knew. I left the house without another word, my niece running behind me begging to come along, and together we drove to the old storage facility, my hands gripping the key as if it were the last thread holding me together. The moment I stood in front of the locker, memories flashed like lightning. My husband hugging me a little tighter one evening, him telling me, "One day you'll understand," him looking at me with eyes that held more love than I ever knew how to hold. And when the lock clicked open, something inside me cracked open too. As the metal door lifted, the light from the hallway spilled in, revealing not money, not valuables, nothing of material worth, only a wooden box with my name carved into it in his handwriting, the handwriting I had memorized a lifetime ago. My knees weakened as I opened it, and inside were letters, dozens of them, written by him during the last year of his life, each one sealed carefully, waiting for a day he hoped I would reach. My breath shattered as I picked up the first letter, the familiar curve of his words making my hands tremble uncontrollably, and as I read, tears fell like rain I couldn't stop. He wrote about how he feared his health was failing but didn't want to worry me, how he made arrangements for my future, how he wanted me to be protected, how he believed in me more than anyone ever had, how he wanted me to be happy even if life took him away. And then, in the final letter at the bottom of the box, written shakily but full of love, he said, "If you are reading this, my love, it means someone delayed giving it to you, and for that, I am sorry, but I trust that one day the truth will find its way to you, because your strength always leads you to where you are meant to be. You were the greatest gift of my life. Never let anyone dim your light. Everything I have saved, everything I planned, everything I left, it is all yours. Go to lawyer Ahmad. He has the documents." My heart stopped. My niece covered her face, sobbing deeply. And suddenly, everything made sense. The fear, the jealousy, the secrecy, the reason they pushed me out so easily after his death. They didn't just want me gone, they wanted to erase me so they could claim what he left behind. With shaking hands, I went to the lawyer mentioned in the letter, and when he saw me, his eyes widened with shock as he said, "I have been waiting years for you. Your husband was very clear about everything, but your family insisted you left the city and didn't want anything." My chest tightened, fury mixing with heartbreak, but when he handed me the file, my entire world shifted in an instant. My husband had left me everything, his savings, his shares, his land, things I never knew he owned, investments I had never heard of. Every single asset was under my name, locked away until the day I came for it. My legs nearly gave out as I signed the documents, reclaiming a future that had been stolen from me by people I once trusted. When I walked out of the office, the wind felt different, the world lighter, as though destiny itself was opening its arms for me. I returned to my old street one last time, and when my sister-in-law opened the door, her eyes swollen and full of regret, she fell to her knees again. But this time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel vengeance. I didn't feel hatred. I felt something far stronger. Freedom. I looked at her and said, "You didn't break me. Life tried. Pain tried. Betrayal tried. But I survived. I am not here for revenge. I am here to close the chapter you kept open for too long." My niece cried again, hugging me tightly as if she never wanted to let go, whispering, "Please don't leave us forever." And I lifted her face and said, "I forgave you the moment you came to find me. But forgiveness didn't mean staying where my heart had already died once." I walked away, head high, heart steady, spirit unshakable, carrying my husband's letters in my bag and his love in my soul, ready to build the life he dreamed for me, a life no one could take away again. And as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, painting the sky in soft gold, I whispered into the wind, "Thank you, my love. I finally found the truth, and I finally found myself." The end. If you loved this story, make sure to like and subscribe. Your support helps me bring more powerful real-life stories to you.